Let us begin to test and examine the nature of crime. What constitutes crime in legal and moral sense? And who can be classified and punished as a criminal? By turning to a story. No, not another hypothetical story. This is a real life story. The case of the Queen versus Dudley and Stephens. Oh, not this Dudley, but this Dudley, some British dude. This was a 19th century British law case that's famous and much debated in law schools. Here's what happened in the case. This video will summarize the story, and then the questions raised in the story will help us get some intuition into moral and legal perspectives on crime. At the end of the video, I want to know how you would rule, imagining that you are the jury. A newspaper account of the time described the background. A sadder story of disaster at sea was never told than that of the survivors of the yacht Mignonet. The ship was found in the South Atlantic, 1,300 miles from the Cape of Good Hope. There were four in the crew. Dudley was the captain. Stephens was the first mate. Brooks was a sailor. All men of excellent character. Or so the newspaper account tells us. The fourth crew member was the cabin boy Parker. Oh, not this Parker. Cabin boy Richard Parker. Parker was 17 years old. He was an orphan. He had no family, no parents. And he was on his first long voyage at sea. He went, the news account tells us, rather against the advice of his friends. He went in the hopefulness of youthful ambition, thinking the journey would make a man of him. Sadly, it was not to be. The facts of the case were not in dispute. A mighty wave hit the ship, and the Mignonet went down. Luckily, the four crew members escaped to a lifeboat, and the only food they had were 2 cans of preserved turnips and no fresh water. For the first 3 days, they ate nothing. The fourth day, they opened a can of turnip and ate it. The next day, they caught a turtle. Together with the other can of turnips, the turtle enabled them to subsist for the next few days. And then, for next 8 days, they had nothing. No food, no water. Imagine yourself in a situation like that. What would you do? Here's what they did. By now, the cabin boy Richard Parker is lying at the bottom of the lifeboat in a corner because he had drunk seawater against the advice of the others and he had become ill and he appeared to be dying. So, on the 19th day, Dudley the captain suggested that they should all have a lottery, that they should all draw lots to see who would die to save the rest. Brooks refused. He didn't like the lottery idea. We don't know whether this was because he didn't want to take that chance or because he believed in categorical moral principles. But in any case, no lots were drawn. The next day, there was still no ship in sight. So Dudley told Brooks to avert his gaze, and he motioned to Stephens that the boy Parker had better be killed. Dudley offered a prayer. He told the boy his time had come, and he killed him with a penknife, stabbing him in the jugular vein. After the boy had been killed, Brooks emerged from his conscientious objection to share in the gruesome bounty. For 4 days, the three of them fed on the body and blood of the cabin boy. True story. And then they were rescued. Dudley describes their rescue in his diary with staggering euphemism. Quote, on the 24th day, as we were having our breakfast, a ship appeared at last. The three survivors were picked up by a German ship and were taken back to Falmouth in England. On arrival in Falmouth, all three were candid about their sea incident. Dudley and Stephens believed themselves to be protected by a custom of the sea. Cannibalism, by the drawing of lots to see who is to be killed and eaten so that the others might survive, is a custom of the sea among shipwrecked survivors. Custom of the sea represents types of laws which are not codified by any authority, but still are accepted and followed by everyone in the group because of some tradition or common acceptance. All three were happy and unaware what was to come. The duty police sergeant of the Falmouth Harbour Police, James Leverty, was nearby the depositions and overheard the statement given to the customs officer. Later, he even questioned Dudley about the means by which he had killed Parker, taking custody of the knife and promising to return it. After some time in harbour detention, they were arrested and tried before the court. Prosecution lawyer William Danforth soon realized that public sentiment in support of three accused and the lack of evidence posed formidable difficulties in the case, and the only witnesses were the three defendants themselves. Danforth told the court that he intended to offer no evidence against Brooks and requested that he be discharged so that Brooks could be called as a witness for the prosecution. Thus, Brooks turned state's witness and Dudley and Stephens went to trial. Dudley and Stephens didn't dispute the facts. Even they claimed that they had acted out of necessity. That was their defense. They argued, in effect, better that one should die so that three could survive. But the prosecutor wasn't swayed by that argument. He said murder is murder, and so the case should go to trial. Now, let us take a step back and try to imagine some questions and facts that the jury was faced with. Parker was an orphan. He had no dependents. Rest three had wife and children waiting for them on the shore. So, was the killing of Parker justified to save the lives of the other three and their family members? What if hunger, thirst, and a crisis with no end in sight affected their mental health and made them do something which they wouldn't in a proper state of mind? Does this absolve them of their crime? Can Dudley and Stephens be exonerated if Parker had consented to be killed to save the rest? Now, with consent in picture, will this make any moral and legal difference for you as a jury? What if they proceeded with the lottery idea and Cabin Boy lost, and the rest of the story unfolded as we saw? Now, with both consent and chance in picture, would you consider this to be morally permissible? Final question, and the question I can answer. Do before mentioned questions have any absolute answer? No. If you thought sacrificing one so that many can survive was justified, you followed consequentialist moral reasoning. Consequentialist moral reasoning locates morality in the consequences of an act. It looks at the end result. How would the world differ when the action has been done? One example of consequentialist moral reasoning is utilitarianism, given by English political philosophers Jeremy Bentham in his book Principles of Morals and Legislation and John Stuart Mill in his book Utilitarianism. According to them, the right thing to do, the just thing to do, is to maximize utility. What did they mean by utility? By utility, they meant the balance of pleasure over pain, happiness over suffering. They started out by observing that all of us are governed by two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. We human beings like pleasure and dislike pain. And so we should base morality, whether we are thinking of what to do in our lives or whether as legislators or citizens, we are thinking about what the law should be. The right thing to do, individually or collectively, is to maximize the overall happiness. And utilitarianism is summed up with the slogan, the greatest good for the greatest number. Whereas if you thought, whatever was the situation, whether with consent or no consent, murder is a murder, and even if all four died, no one had to sacrifice his life for the rest. You followed categorical moral reasoning. Categorical moral reasoning given by the likes of Immanuel Kant in his book The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Moral locates morality in certain rights and duties, regardless of the consequences. To put it simply, there are certain things that are categorically wrong and categorically right, even if they bring about a good result or a bad result, respectively. Your argument points toward each and every person having certain fundamental duties and rights that take precedence over maximizing utility. You reject the notion that morality is about calculating any consequences. When we act out of duty, doing something simply because it is right, only then do our actions have moral worth. Thus, what constitutes crime, as per the law, and who can be categorized a criminal, is a function of the time and prevalent moral reasoning. For example, cannibalism, which was an acceptable practice in a specific time period, place, and circumstances, became a crime as per the changing and accepted moral principles of that time. For the record, I'll tell you what happened with Dudley and Stephen. They had argued in the court that necessity had provoked them to kill Richard Parker, which was consistent with what shipwreck survivors had been doing in the past. But the jury this time held that necessity was not a defense for a charge of murder, and the two defendants were convicted with death sentence. Though later their death sentence was commuted to 6 months imprisonment. Thank you.